Marco Rubio appeared confident that he could challenge Jasmine Crockett during a live televised hearing. The Florida senator, supported by decades of political experience, tried to confront the younger Texas Congresswoman in a tense Senate committee session. He described her policy ideas as underdeveloped and framed her as another progressive newcomer who doesn't fully understand how politics actually works. However, what followed caught everyone off guard and quickly circulated across political circles nationwide. Crockett didn't just reply. She broke down Rubio's arguments using clear, structured facts he was not prepared to counter. The moment she opened her research folder and started referencing detailed information, Rubio's confident expression shifted almost immediately. Within a short time, he struggled to defend his position, offering unclear and general responses. Then, in front of C-SPAN cameras and a full audience, he stood up and walked out of the hearing, appearing to concede the moment. This was not a typical policy disagreement or routine exchange in Washington. It reflected a significant misstep by a seasoned politician who underestimated a newer colleague, assuming her shorter time in Congress meant less capability. The video spread rapidly, trending worldwide as millions watched a clear example of how strong preparation can outweigh overconfidence. Before we examine how Crockett systematically challenged one of the GOP's most recognized figures, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss any major political updates. You'll want to follow every detail of this exchange. The exchange began when Rubio introduced what he believed was a safe line of criticism. He has spent more than a decade in Washington, served on key committees, and built a reputation as someone highly knowledgeable about policy. Crockett, in contrast, was still seen by many as relatively new to the environment. What Rubio did not expect was that he was facing someone whose legal career had prepared her for exactly these situations. Moments where experienced officials underestimate capable opponents and are then corrected. To understand this moment, it's important to look at both figures. On one side is Marco Rubio, the 53-year-old senator from Florida who has been in Washington since 2011 and is confident in his understanding of the system. He ran for president in 2016, serves on major committees such as Foreign Relations and Intelligence, and has built a reputation as a detail-focused Republican who carefully studies legislation. Rubio's image is based on preparation, someone who reviews extensive reports, works with data, and discusses foreign policy or economic issues with ease. As a Cuban-American who speaks multiple languages, he often highlights his ability to engage across a wide range of topics. Even some Democrats acknowledge that, despite political differences, he has a strong grasp of policy. On the other side is Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old representative from Texas who entered Washington in 2023. While some longtime lawmakers still consider her a newcomer, she brings significant legal experience. Before joining Congress, she worked as a civil rights attorney, spending years in courtrooms handling major cases and winning against opponents with far greater resources. As a black congresswoman representing Dallas, she has already gained national attention for refusing to step back in confrontations with senior figures from either party. Crockett previously served in the Texas legislature, where she developed a reputation for asking direct questions and rejecting incomplete or unclear answers. Although she has only been in Congress for 2 years, she has already challenged several established Republican figures. The setting was a joint Senate-House committee hearing on economic policy, focusing on inflation and federal spending affecting millions of American families. These hearings are typically routine, filled with prepared statements, predictable testimony, and standard exchanges. Politicians usually rely on notes, experts repeat familiar points, and little stands out. Public attention is often minimal unless something unusually tense occurs. This hearing, however, was different. It followed a series of heated exchanges on social media between progressive Democrats and establishment Republicans. The political atmosphere was already tense, with both sides looking to create moments that could gain attention ahead of upcoming midterm elections. Rubio had spent the week posting on Twitter about newer Democratic members who, in his view, lacked a basic understanding of economics. While he did not mention names directly, his comments clearly targeted the progressive wing. He criticized certain Democratic proposals as unrealistic ideas promoted by individuals who had never managed a business or handled a budget, policies he described as risky and potentially harmful to working families. Even without direct mention, it was clear Crockett was among those he was referring to. She responded on Twitter, writing, "Some people confuse experience with competence. Being wrong for 20 years doesn't make you right." Her post quickly gained attention online, increasing anticipation of a possible confrontation. So when both appeared at the same committee hearing with Crockett scheduled to question witnesses right after Rubio, many expected some level of tension. What no one expected was how one-sided the exchange would ultimately become. The stakes were high for both individuals. Rubio viewed this as an opportunity to publicly challenge a progressive newcomer and reinforce his reputation as a policy expert capable of debating anyone. For Crockett, the hearing was a chance to show she belonged on the national stage and could stand firm against senior Republican lawmakers. Neither anticipated that the next 20 minutes would shape their political trajectories in unexpected ways. The timing of the exchange made it even more important. The hearing occurred just weeks before the midterm campaign season was set to begin in full force. Both parties were looking for moments that could energize supporters and appeal to undecided voters. Rubio had been presenting himself as a steady, experienced figure during a time of economic uncertainty. His team had quietly circulated his name for potential leadership roles and had even hinted at another presidential run. Crockett, meanwhile, represented a newer generation of Democrats who were no longer focused on playing defense and were prepared to challenge Republicans directly and confidently. The setting seemed almost designed for a political confrontation. The committee room, with its detailed woodwork and traditional Washington setting, reflected long-standing structures of political authority. However, the gallery included not only the usual attendees but also younger staffers and activists who had heard speculation that something notable might happen. C-SPAN cameras were recording. Social media teams from both sides were ready with their phones, and political reporters were already preparing possible headlines. The hearing began in a routine manner. Economists and policy specialists discussed inflation and federal spending. Rubio appeared comfortable, asking detailed questions about monetary policy and trade. He looked confident, composed, and clearly focused on demonstrating his expertise for the cameras. When it was his turn to question the witnesses, he moved into what seemed like a prepared critique of what he described as fiscally irresponsible ideas being promoted by some newer members of Congress. Without naming anyone directly, his attention repeatedly shifted toward Crockett. "We're seeing proposals from certain newer members that reflect a basic misunderstanding of how economics works," Rubio said, his tone becoming firmer. "These aren't serious policy discussions. They're talking points designed for attention." The camera showed Crockett continuing to take notes, her expression calm and focused. She did not appear unsettled or irritated. If anything, she seemed to be organizing her response. Rubio continued, growing more assured as he spoke. Some of these proposals, he argued, would cost trillions of dollars without a clear plan to fund them. It's easy to make large promises when you are not responsible for long-term consequences. Those with experience, he suggested, understand the realities better. At that point, the exchange became more personal. During a brief recess, when microphones were expected to be off, Rubio made a comment that was still picked up. "Maybe we should require a minimum level of experience before people can propose major economic legislation," he said, sounding confident. However, the microphones were still active, and the remark was heard throughout the room. Crockett looked up from her notes. For the first time, there was a visible shift in her expression. It was not panic or embarrassment but controlled frustration, the kind developed after repeated exposure to dismissive behavior and knowing how to respond effectively. When the hearing resumed and it was Crockett's turn to question the witnesses, the tension in the room was clear. Members from both parties sat more attentively. The gallery, which had been partly empty earlier, was now filled with staffers and reporters who had heard what occurred during the break. Crockett began by calmly asking the economists standard questions about inflation and employment. However, it became clear she was building toward a broader point. Her questions became more precise and structured, presenting information step by step, similar to an attorney organizing a case. Then she turned slightly toward Rubio. "I want to thank the senator from Florida for his comments regarding experience and economic understanding," she said in a steady tone. "I think it is useful to review everyone's record when it comes to economic predictions and actual outcomes." Rubio looked up immediately, alert. This was not the defensive response he had expected. Crockett was not trying to justify herself. She was redirecting attention back toward him. "Since the senator mentioned experience," she continued, lifting a thick folder from her desk, "I've reviewed some of his previous positions on economic issues, and I believe the public should be aware of how accurate those predictions have been." The room became quiet. The hearing was intended to focus on current economic conditions, not to evaluate past statements of individual lawmakers. However, Crockett remained within procedural boundaries while guiding the discussion in a new direction. Rubio adjusted in his seat, appearing less comfortable. His earlier confidence began to decline as he realized this was not the straightforward exchange he had anticipated. "I'm sure the Congresswoman understands that economic forecasting is complex," Rubio said, attempting to interject. "Oh, I understand complexity very well, Senator," Crockett replied, opening her folder. "That's why I find some of your past statements confusing, statements that sounded certain at the time but turned out to be inaccurate." The hearing room fell silent, aside from the sound of papers turning and cameras capturing the moment. It was clear to everyone present that something unusual was unfolding. Committee hearings rarely create viral moments, but the tension was now impossible to overlook. What many did not realize was that Crockett had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Her staff had monitored Rubio's public statements, reviewed his voting record, and compared his predictions with actual economic data. She had detailed research ready, organized and documented, to support everything she was about to present. This was not performance. It was preparation meeting opportunity, and Rubio was about to face the results. What followed would later be described as one of the most decisive congressional exchanges in recent memory, an example political analysts would reference for years. Crockett opened the folder and began a direct, evidence-based review of Rubio's economic record. The binder was carefully arranged with color-coded tabs, a clear indication of extensive preparation rather than a last-minute effort. It was structured, methodical work designed for a moment exactly like this. "Senator Rubio, in 2017, you stated that the Trump tax cuts would pay for themselves through increased economic growth." Crockett began, reading from documents with citations. "You said, and I quote, 'These tax cuts will generate enough economic activity to actually reduce the deficit.' Do you recall making that statement?" Rubio appeared caught off guard. "Well, economic policy takes time." "I'm not finished, Senator," Crockett responded, maintaining a steady tone. "According to the Congressional Budget Office, those tax cuts added $1.9 trillion to the national debt. The growth you predicted did not occur. So, were you mistaken or misleading?" The clarity of her question shifted the tone in the room. It was more direct than typical committee exchanges and required a clear response. Rubio attempted to respond again. "The Congresswoman is oversimplifying." "Let's consider another example," Crockett said, moving to the next page. "In 2018, you repeatedly stated that tariffs on Chinese goods would bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States and would not increase consumer prices. You made these claims in multiple hearings, including this one." She continued without pausing. "What actually happened? Manufacturing jobs continued to decline, and consumer prices increased. The trade policies you supported raised costs for American families and did not achieve their intended goals." Rubio appeared increasingly uncomfortable, briefly looking around the room as if expecting someone to intervene. No one did. Attention remained focused on the exchange. "Senator, you've served in Congress for 13 years, Crockett continued, her tone firm. "During that time, your economic predictions have often been inaccurate. You supported austerity measures that slowed recovery. You opposed infrastructure investments that economists said were necessary. You voted against policies that could have reduced inflation earlier." She leaned slightly forward. "So when you question my experience and qualifications, I have to ask, what are yours based on, given this record?" The room reacted quietly, subtle murmurs, low whispers, and the sound of phones as staffers began sharing updates. Crockett continued, making it clear she had thoroughly examined Rubio's economic positions and documented each point. "Let's review your position during the 2020 COVID response," she said, taking out another set of documents. "You opposed extended unemployment benefits, arguing they would reduce motivation and harm the economy. You opposed direct relief payments, calling them unnecessary government spending. And you objected to small business support programs, suggesting the market should adjust on its own." Rubio attempted to interrupt. "The Congresswoman is taking these statements out of context." "Am I?" Crockett replied, holding up a document. "Because I have your exact words here. You said unemployment benefits would create long-term dependence on government assistance. You said direct payments would weaken the work ethic that supports this country. These are your statements, Senator." She raised the papers slightly so they were visible. "And what happened when Congress approved those programs despite your objections? Unemployment declined faster than expected. Consumer spending helped stabilize the economy, and small businesses that received support were able to remain open and retain employees." The precision of her argument became increasingly clear. This was not a general critique. It was a structured evaluation of Rubio's economic approach, supported by direct quotes and measurable outcomes. Senator Rubio, you emphasize that experience matters, Crockett continued. But what is the value of experience when the record shows repeated inaccuracies? What does long-term involvement mean if conclusions and predictions do not align with reality? Rubio now appeared visibly unsettled. His earlier confidence had faded as he quickly sorted through his papers. The Congresswoman is making personal attacks instead of addressing policy, he said. Personal attacks? Crockett responded. Senator, you question my qualifications. I am presenting verifiable information about your record. Are factual statements now considered personal attacks? The committee chair attempted to restore order, but the tone of the exchange had already shifted. Rubio appeared significantly less composed than at the start. Crockett then made one final point. Since you mentioned social media and public engagement, Senator, let's review your Twitter activity, she said, holding printed screenshots. In the past year, you've posted over 200 tweets about economic issues. My staff reviewed them. Would you like to estimate how many were accurate? Rubio leaned back in his chair, appearing ready to disengage. I don't believe this is an appropriate use of committee time, he said quietly. 12%, Crockett replied. Only 12% of your economic statements on social media were confirmed to be accurate. The rest were misleading, lacked necessary context, or were incorrect. And yet you've chosen to question my understanding of economics. At that point, Rubio appeared to lose composure. He stood abruptly, gathering his papers with visible urgency. I have other committee commitments, he said, avoiding direct eye contact. You're leaving, Senator? Crockett asked. I thought you were interested in a substantive discussion on economic policy and expertise. Rubio continued toward the exit, his staff quickly following. As he reached the doorway, Crockett added a final remark. For someone who emphasizes preparation and experience, I expected a more complete response today. The room reacted with quiet murmurs as one of the Senate's most visible members left during a hearing led by a second-term House representative. Cameras captured Rubio pausing briefly near the exit, as if considering whether to return. The hesitation was noticeable but brief. Without turning back, he exited the room, followed by his staff. The message was clear. A long-serving senator had stepped away from an exchange with a newer member who had come prepared. The committee chair, Representative Williams, attempted to restore order, but the hearing had already changed significantly. What began as a routine policy discussion had become a major political moment that would shape coverage for weeks. The aftermath of Jasmine Crockett's exchange with Marco Rubio was immediate and far-reaching. Within minutes of his departure, clips of the interaction spread across social media. Footage of Rubio gathering his papers and leaving while Crockett calmly concluded her remarks quickly became widely shared. Rubio run began trending within the hour, accompanied by videos of his exit, comparisons of his statements with actual outcomes and commentary about his departure. Reactions online came from across the political spectrum. Progressive Democrats responded enthusiastically. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez posted, "When you come for Jasmine without preparation, the result is clear. He should have known better." The post gained over 200,000 likes within 2 hours. Moderate Democrats and political analysts who often remain neutral also acknowledged Crockett's preparation and clarity. CNN's Jake Tapper commented, "Regardless of political views, that was a strong example of preparation meeting opportunity." Republican responses were mixed. Some argued Rubio had been unfairly targeted or that Crockett had moved beyond standard committee conduct. Privately, however, several GOP staff members expressed concern about how unprepared Rubio appeared. One Republican aide told Politico, "We know Rubio can rely on improvisation, but this was difficult to watch. She had documentation for everything and he didn't. Preparation is essential in today's environment." Traditional media coverage also presented challenges for Rubio. The Washington Post published a fact-check confirming that most of Crockett's statements about his economic record were accurate. The headline read, "Representative Crockett's claims about Senator Rubio's economic history mostly accurate." The New York Times released an analysis titled, "When Preparation Meets Opportunity, a House Sophomore Outperforms a Senate Veteran." Even conservative outlets responded. The Wall Street Journal editorial board criticized reliance on confidence without sufficient research. Fox News, while avoiding direct criticism, dedicated significant coverage to Crockett's performance, with several hosts noting her level of preparation. The political impact was substantial. Rubio had been viewed as a potential 2028 presidential candidate, someone positioned between traditional Republicans and younger voters. His reputation depended on being seen as knowledgeable and policy-focused. That image was significantly weakened in less than 20 minutes. Analysts quickly pointed to a broader shift. This moment represented more than a single political setback. It reflected a generational change in expectations. Authority based only on seniority was no longer enough. A new group of lawmakers was emerging, equipped with research, detailed knowledge, and a willingness to challenge established figures with evidence. Political scientist Dr. Sarah Martinez summarized this shift on MSNBC, stating, "This is not just a setback for Marco Rubio. It shows how expectations in politics have changed. Experience alone is no longer sufficient. Voters and colleagues expect claims to be supported by facts." For Crockett, the outcome was largely positive. Her social media following increased by over 100,000 in a single day. Contributions to her re-election campaign rose significantly. Advocacy groups began reaching out regarding endorsements and future appearances. More importantly, congressional leadership took notice. While some had previously viewed her approach as overly direct, they now recognized her as an effective participant in major hearings. She received invitations to several Sunday news programs, an uncommon opportunity for a second-term representative. The video of the exchange became one of the most viewed political clips of the year, reaching more than 10 million views across platforms within 48 hours. It resonated not only with political observers but also with general audiences who recognized the level of preparation involved. For Rubio, efforts to manage the situation were less effective. His team arranged interviews to address the narrative, but public perception had already shifted. He was seen as an experienced senator who appeared unprepared at a critical moment. Future appearances would likely be viewed through the lens of this exchange. The incident also sparked broader discussions about accountability and preparation in government. Editorial boards emphasized the importance of supporting arguments with evidence. Political science instructors began using the clip as an example of effective research and debate readiness. Some Republicans framed the moment as overly aggressive behavior from Democrats. However, polling indicated that many Americans across party lines viewed Crockett's preparation as appropriate and believed elected officials should be accountable for past statements. The long-term political effects are still developing, but several trends are already visible. This moment is influencing how political debates and hearings are approached in Washington. For Crockett, the trajectory is upward. She is now seen as a prominent voice within the Democratic Party, someone capable of challenging senior figures with confidence and detailed preparation. Discussions have already begun regarding potential future roles, including a possible Senate campaign against Ted Cruz in 2030, a race that would likely attract national attention. Party leadership, once cautious about her direct style, now views her as a strategic asset in high-profile situations. Donors who were previously unfamiliar with her have started to show interest. For Rubio, the outlook is less certain. His potential path toward a 2028 presidential campaign now appears significantly weakened, possibly in a lasting way.